So how's it going, man?
Oh, it's going pretty well. It's a Monday, so that's always a thing.
Yeah,
Um,
it's the truth.
but it was one of the good Mondays for me. We had the first one of the semester back in the chapel for the
Mm,
adoration and confession time and all that.
okay.
So I had a full day of reading through the Biblia and like spending time just contemplating and praying. So that was nice.
Dude, that's so cool that you get that. Like I'm not allowed to say it, but like I envy aspects of your job, right?
No,
So
no,
like I
absolutely,
don't envy the teacher's paycheck. Like, don't get me wrong,
sure,
right? But the idea that you get to like do your faith as your job is literally what I have written down for the vision of my life, right? Is to
yeah,
be able to provide for my family while doing the will of God. And you get to do that. Like, that is the
yeah.
coolest freaking thing ever. Like,
Oh,
it's,
you, yeah.
it's cool,
And
man.
honestly, like, it is really, really cool when you get to have the opportunity to see some of the kids who, like, let's not kid ourselves. It's not like any of them are super excited by the idea that they're going to
Mm-hmm.
go spend 40 minutes in the chapel.
Mm-hmm.
But every now and then, you'll get one of them who, because, like, I've got to give them something to do. Like, it's not going to take
Yeah.
the full time, but I give them some, like, a passage to do a really basic kind of lexio. Like, what does this mean? What stands out to me? Why? What am I going to do about it?
Mm.
And just kind of lay that out for them. So it's not going to take the time. But every now and then, there'll be one where you can tell, you know what? Something connected. And, like, what I'm getting back from them is really cool. And it's like, oh, sweet. So my job, like, as much as sometimes it might feel like I am, just running face first into a brick wall repeatedly. It's chipping away a little bit. We're
Yeah.
getting there.
Yeah.
And yeah, no, I adore
Oh,
it, man.
man. That's cool. That's so cool. All right. All right. Let's hit an intro and jump into it. Welcome to the podcast, Blue Collar Scholars. Not long ago, a group of brilliant minds met together at a pub to discuss their unfinished works. They recognized the value of coming together around delicious beverages and having meaningful conversations. That group was known as the Inklings. The Inkle Do podcast here, we're working to be the second iteration of that group. So, pour yourself a craft beverage, pull up a chair, and join the conversation. Okay, hopefully you've had something good because again, like I've literally had nothing. Like we're even like drinking utility wine. Like we're like in the like liter and a half, the like big one. Like even to the point
Oh
where like
man,
Kristen's like, "This is a good wine." I was like, eh, "Is it?" She's
this
like,
is
It's a good weeknight wine." I was like, "Okay, deal."
it is it is exactly what we paid for.
And that is exactly right.
Yeah, no. Let's see. I'm trying to think now. I was really hoping that you were going to be
That had
like
something.
breaking
Okay,
your slide on it a little bit.
all right. Well, let's switch it around because so something that I a realization around a beverage that I had this week is fantastic because I've started. So like I wrote a novel a while back,
Mm-hmm.
like a long while back,
Yeah,
and finished it. And then I was like, okay, I need to rewrite it because that's what writers do. They write a story and then they rewrite it to make it perfect. And I started rewriting it. And I was like, I absolutely hate this. And it overwhelmed me and I shelved it. And it's been numerous years and probably close to 8 to 10 years when I finished that thing. So I pulled it back out and I'm not rewriting it from scratch. Instead, what I'm doing is I'm just like reworking, like just reading it and fixing the language and changing and rearranging and stuff, right from top down.
oh, tell me that you're doing this with like it written in pencil and you're just going over it with pen, like
No, no, no,
the full
no,
on Tolkien edit.
no. Everything is online. Google Docs
Ah,
because like I would
I
leave
get
it a
it.
piece of paper and then I'd be like
I get it.
just disappointed. That's
I
all.
mean, look, it's purely selfish, 100% selfish, because I wasn't the one who was going to have to deal with any of the consequences of the decision to do it on
Right.
paper. But
I do have, so like the so this is was originally built to be a series, and so like I do have a notebook full of
right.
handwritten notes in there. So like it is very very much like that. But so I'm starting to rework it, and I've found that just like, so this is my setting, right? I We have our new PlayStation, we call it, where it's like a little gaming TV with a couch for video games for the kids, and we put a little bar behind it, right?
Okay.
Like a table and chairs kind of
Yeah.
bar. So I sit there, I put the TV on, and I found like these landscapes in
Mm.
on YouTube,
Yeah.
right, where it'll be like like in a cafe, and there'll be like snow falling through the window in the cafe and a fireplace. And I'm working on my book, and I found that just like having this glass of wine while I'm working on my book with like this, because I'm lying to myself because like I want to be in a cafe, but I can't. So instead, I like VR it with YouTube in the distance. But sitting there, like working on something creative in a cool setting, and then just like the beverage just kind of like pulls it all together. It was really weird because like I found that it helped. It gave me something to just kind of like when I needed to take a brain break, like a breather, like I'd be writing something and I just needed to like take a step back and kind of look at it. Like, how did it affect before? How's it going to affect it downstream? And then you can just kind of like take a sip, and it gives you like something to process on top of it. And it just kind of helps everything flow all together. And I was like, this is this is so cool to just sit here, even if it's just utility wine. Like this is a
Mm-hmm.
one note wine that is not special, but like again, like diner coffee, utility wine. But the experience is cool. Like I found that I really like this like setting and the way that the beverage gives me something to process. Just kind of like in a conversation to where like if you needed to think, you could just like take a drink, or while somebody else is talking, you could just sit there and like sip on something, and it kind of the small motion of your body helps your brain process.
Oh,
So
definitely.
well, I'm way overcomplicating a simple thing, but like I was just having this epiphany, and I
Well, and I think it makes a lot of sense, especially when you talk about like that idea of actually thinking about what it is that you're drinking, because you're right. There's the motion part of it, but there's also, you're looking at it, you're smelling it, you're tasting it. Like legitimately, I think hearing is probably the only sense not involved in the process.
I actually have my earbuds plugged into like a weird, it's like a creativity channel, which is like the
No, no,
450
sure, but I'm saying like in
kilohertz.
the drink itself.
Oh, fair, fair, fair,
Yeah,
fair.
yeah. In
Yes,
the
yes,
drink
yes,
itself, I
yes.
was gonna say if
No,
you're
I'm
about to
not
tell me,
like
if
ting
you're about to tell me you
ting.
can hear the wine, I am about to come through the screen
You're
on
like,
you.
he's on another level, man.
The level of pretentious is just far, far, far too much. But no, yeah, I think there is something to that, and I think that's also, I think it's a really important connection when you're talking about like in the idea of conversation,
Mm-hmm.
that ability to, you've got to have something that's your pause button.
Yeah.
Because
Mm,
I mean, I'm gonna be honest, I want to be talking most of the time. I
right.
don't actually. Like, I'm very uncomfortable with the idea of being center stage and everyone paying attention to me, because I'm constantly trying to figure out how to phrase things slightly better and all of that. But my default move when I'm uncomfortable is to talk more,
Right.
not less. And so having something that's like, huh, like it's a huge benefit to have that brief pause where
Yeah.
it's not, it prevents it being an awkward silence because there's an explanation
kind
for the
kind of makes it
silence.
socially acceptable. Like it's normal to just like take a drink, but it gives you that moment to formulate a thought and speak clearly, type of a thing. Like it keeps it from rushing. Yeah.
Yes.
It's interesting. Yeah, there's so much that goes into it. And like I said, I was just a really weird epiphany. And I was like, you're right. Like in the social settings and everything, like there's a reason why all these things happen around food and drink, man.
Yep.
Food and drink. And again, more drink probably because food, I'm not doing a lot of talking. Let's be honest. I like, I mean,
Yeah.
it happens unless but like when the food comes out, like I'm going to be like, hey, pause, time out, wolf some food down. And then like, as I'm digesting, I can talk a little bit.
Yeah. Up until the, up until that starts happening. Yeah, exactly. But yeah, no, and I think you're right. Because the other part of it is like, beverages are, food is almost too involved.
It is. Yeah.
And so like And I'm always worried that I'm going to make a mess, just like dumping stuff all over my Love and Challenge T-shirt and
It's a
everything.
good shirt,
It's
man.
super nice, it's
I
super
like that
comfortable.
one.
But yeah, no, I think that's. I think we've done a good job stretching to fill for the fact that neither one of us have drank
Had
anything
anything
remotely
interesting?
interesting
Yeah,
in a week.
that's fair. So if you want to be creative or not socially awkward, just have a beverage in hand.
Comes in
Makes
handy.
makes things super easy. Yeah, yeah, yeah. So you were talking about some handwritten notes, and I am also reading the Silmarillion, and so we
Love
talked
that for
about it
you.
a little while ago that we wanted to dig into it, and I think that we'll be on pace. I think I have 80 pages left, maybe
Oh
75
dang!
pages left.
Way to go.
So I'm chipping away at it. Well, like I started at just like picking at it, right? And then I started liking it. And then all of a sudden I'm like gushing. Like I got past the so like I like it sucked me in with like the creation story and then like
Mm-hmm.
all of the angels and demons type stuff. Um but then it like I came to that Tolkien halt, and this is the part that lost me in the Lord of the Rings, and like I wasn't able to get over the hurdle. So
Mm-hmm.
in the Lord of the Rings, they were walking through a forest, right?
Yeah.
In the Silmarillion, the Elven kingdoms are establishing. And so it's like these people by this river and these people by that mountain, and this mountain goes down this river, and you're like, okay, like he described a map for like 10 pages, right? And so
Mm-hmm.
but I was able to get through it. And then I started coming into like the like hero tales. Like it went from like a creation story to a map to hero tales. And then that's when it got me. Right. And I'm just like gushing in love with it. And it's hitting all of these chords. So like Beowulf is one of my favorite pieces, which is one of Tolkien's favorite pieces. And like
Mm-hmm.
you I feel Beowulf in the Silmarillion a lot more than I do in Lord of the Rings,
Sure.
and so I am just I'm really digging this. It's to the point to where it's like I wonder if I should go back through and try Lord of the Rings and stuff like that a second time after, like maybe give it a second run now that
As
I'm grown up a little bit.
as a quick aside, yes, definitely do that. Um, but yeah, no, I think that's kind of the key though, is like you said, there's a persistence that's kind of required for reading Tolkien. Because Tolkien does so much. Like
Mm-hmm.
he does everything. He does all of it. And so whatever it is that you like or dislike about a story, it's gonna be in there.
Mm-hmm.
Both of those things,
Yeah.
you know. And yeah, so it's not necessarily easy, but again, when you know what's coming and that you like you said,
Yes.
it's for a few pages that it's going to be this thing that you're like, ah,
You just
okay,
slog through this
okay,
pace. Yep.
but then it's going to come good.
Yep. I agree. And it's one of the things that I noticed that I really like because like I like Greek mythology, right? And so
Mm-hmm.
like I did a lot of mythology in college. Always liked mythology, and the Silmarillion I think hits that chord for me too because it reads just like one of my Greek mythology books. Like I could go
Yeah,
grab the one off and be like, it reads just like this book, and it really is a mythology of the Lord of the Rings world. So like this is like the creation story and the heroes, it's like the Hercules and the all of those things all wrapped into this one thing. And I was thinking about how important these stories are. And I guess I've been consuming a lot of Tolkien, so I'm sorry if I'm bouncing around, but there's this YouTube channel called Stories of Old, and he kind of like analyzes from like a philosophical point of view, like movies and things like that. And so he was doing the philosophy of Lord of the Rings, and he used the word fairy tale a lot. And I was like, I never considered it a fairy tale, but Tolkien kind of did.
oh, Tolkien very much did. Like one of his goals, tying into this idea of mythology you're talking about, part of why he wrote it is that he was like borderline despondent over the fact that there wasn't a like fairy tale, there wasn't a fairyland origin that was like purely British.
Mm.
Like he was the closest you could kind of find is the stories of like Arthur and the Knights of the Round Table.
Mm-hmm.
But even those ultimately have their roots in
And
like the Trojans and those kinds of things, like coming over from
yep,
mainland Europe.
yep,
And so he very much intentionally set out to be like, you know what, there will be a British, an English mythology and an English fairy story.
yeah,
And yeah, it is dripping with a
yeah.
lot of that stuff. But you're right. I think when we hear someone talking about fairy tales, you know, we tend to think of like very childish things.
Well, like what we tend to think of is Disney.
Right.
And Disney is the like as I'm reading these things and I connect it to fairy tales and then I think about Disney and I'm like, Disney is the most vanilla Diet Coke crap of a fairy tale nowadays. Because like if you go back and read Cinderella,
Uh-huh.
right? Like it's not.
Yeah, there's some gruesome things that happen when you're trying to put a glass slipper on.
Yeah, it's dark and it's awful. And
Things didn't go well for the Little Mermaid either.
no, they didn't. The Little Mermaid is also a very dark one, you know, and so that's what we tend to think of. And the more and more I thought about it is that like these Disney ones where they're like, sure, the main character might have a ghost in their past or something bad may have happened, which is usually their dad is killed because for some reason Disney likes killing males. I don't know
There's
what
got
their
to be at
deal
least
is.
one parent dead for a Disney story.
Yeah, it's true. So they usually might have something like that, but there's no real tragedy in them, right? Like they're really happy endings. They're happy. It's for the magical place on Earth, right?
Mm-hmm.
Happiest place on Earth, whatever it is. And so they're really shallow, and I think we're missing something by not having true fairy tales anymore. Like by we've kind of I don't know that is sanitized maybe the right word. Like we've made everything
I
so PC and soft and like and just the thing that kept coming up is the way that like there's so much tragedy in the Silmarillion.
mm-hmm.
But like I'm never sad. Like it's and I was like this is the most profound feeling I've had in a long time in my interaction with art is that
Mm-hmm.
like so much tragedy but I'm not sad. But then like there's so much happiness or whatever in these Disney ones, but I'm not getting any purpose or meaning or depth to it, right? So like would
It's
you rather have
happiness, not joy.
yeah,
It's
it's shallow.
yeah, it's the sugar rush of
Mm,
happiness. Like it's here. Let me have some of this, and it will instantly give me this, but it's not going to last.
right.
And I mean, obviously, we are both people who spend a lot of time with Disney.
Yes.
I
Yes,
don't
we
have
do.
any children to like blame my Disney addiction on.
I was doing it long before I had kids
Oh,
and I got no
100%.
way out.
And so
Yeah.
like I don't want to like dump on Disney per se, but just point out kind of like what you're saying that there's this other thing that's missing. There should be both.
There's a
And I
place, right.
cuz I think, fairy tales were they were there to tell us that the world was scary, that the world was
Mm-hmm.
tough, that the world was dangerous, but that the world was magical
Mm-hmm.
and that it was good. And, G.K. Chesterton, which, I mean, we started off talking about Tolkien and now I get to cite Chesterton. I mean, this is just the best podcast episode
A
ever.
little giddy.
I can't help it. As soon as I saw we were talking about fairy tales, I was like, ooh, Chesterton, I get to mention him. But no, like he talked about the idea that, fairy tales are important not because they tell us that dragons exist. Every
Obviously.
boy growing up, every child growing up knows that there are dragons out there.
Mm-hmm.
Fairy tales are important because they tell us that if a knight is brave enough, is true enough, and strong enough, then the dragon can be defeated.
Yep.
But there's a cost.
Mm-hmm.
There's a sacrifice that's required. And like you said, tragedy. I mean, in Tolkien, so many of the core tales are tales that are tragedies, and yet there is the main undercurrent of them is hope.
Hmm.
That the victory didn't happen then. Beren and Luthien did not get their ultimate joy and time together then. Turin, that poor man,
Yeah, I think I just finished his story.
brutal.
Yeah.
But as brutal as it is, at the end of it is always the promise that this brutality isn't actually the end. That through his efforts have meaning, even if he didn't get the rewards himself at that point. But through his efforts, these things have been set in motion, which we
Hmm.
will see later on bring to fruition this
Yeah.
reward and this goodness.
It almost combats the type of fatalism that we have in our stories nowadays,
Mm,
right? Like when you read, like, you think that, oh, Hercules started his journey, therefore he will have a happy ending, like, and that's not how it works. Like, these characters are links in a chain, like they died without a happy ending because the victory is way in the future over the big bad, right? But
yep.
without them, that chain doesn't continue. So like even though you didn't see the victory, your role was still very important, right? And so like that's where you feel that tragedy because they didn't see it. But you're also inspired because despite them not seeing it, they would have done it anyway, right? Or they would have chose to do it, or they were doing good for good's sake, or have a vision, like all of the different variations that characters can have. But it wasn't like I'm only going to do this if I get a happy ending. It
Right.
was rarely that. There was usually like a deep love that was driving people forward, and that's so much different than the risk reward. Like, I'm only going to take this risk if I get this reward. And it's like, no, that is shallow, shallow, completely shallow. Instead, like, have this deep, rich love for someone, whether it's a love of friend or a love of family, that is urging them forward into danger. So it's this good that takes them into tragedy almost, and they're willing to go into tragedy. And there's so many of them that are told, like, look, if you go, this doom is on you. And they're
Mm-hmm.
like, I choose that doom because my love is, and you're like, dang, let's go. Like
Yeah,
that's the type of people you want to roll with, man.
absolutely. And like Tolkien, his even the concept of hope, it. I was actually having a conversation with a bunch of my classes last week where we were talking about the four different loves.
Mm-hmm.
That's where we were at. But I used the line from Carlin that in the English language we have four words for pancakes and only one word for love. And like that says something about
Yeah.
what we feel like we need to express. In a slightly different kind of context, Tolkien seems to have had the same understanding about the word hope. That like
Mm.
what we mean when we say hope is too vague. Like there are two types of hope in his books, in his languages, because again, he was a linguist before he was an author.
Mm-hmm.
Like you sometimes get the impression that he was writing the stories purely because he wanted to have an excuse to invent the words that he would need in these different elvish languages.
Yeah.
But like he had the two types of hope. So there was Umdir, which is like our earthly hope. This idea of I hope that if I set out to do this, I will succeed. And then there was Estel, which was this higher hope, this ultimate hope. And it wasn't so much a hope built on what I'm doing as again that idea of the link in the chain, the hope in the power of good, ultimately in Eru Eluvatar.
Mm-hmm.
But like in this idea that the world is created good and that the good is the power that is in charge. And So long
Mm-hmm.
as we continue to strive to cooperate with that, I don't know how the heck it's going to happen, but it'll turn out.
Yes, I think you said that perfectly. It's the foundation of good, and then it's the striving with trust in that goodness. Like you
Yeah.
trust that it's good, and then you strive. And I'm like, that is so what we need in the world today is trusting in the goodness and then striving to bring it about, or like in all these things. And it's interesting the way that it's all put up that way, because there's always conflict, right? So like even in the definitions, that hope that you just gave us there is that there assumes a conflict,
Yep.
right? That the good is in charge, which means that right now it doesn't look like it's in charge, right? Because there's a big bad stomping around who's just tearing everything apart. And so the other thing that I really noticed was like the contrast that was built in. Like it wasn't, no, it kind of is extremes almost. Like when you look at Melkor and all of these different characters, they seem like they're just evil for evil's sake. And that's wrong. And so like you have the backstory and you have a lot of these other things. And this is where, you know, modern storytelling saw those things and got it wrong. Is that they said, oh, like the twirling the mustache villain is the evil for evil's sake, like Melkor is, right? Because they're just bad. The
Mm-hmm.
villain in Snow White, whatever, Maleficent, she's just bad because she's a bad person, baddie, right? Like a
Yeah.
bad baddie. But that's not, you're missing the point on that. And so then you start getting the gray characters and the anti-heroes and the like response to those, right? So instead of having the good versus evil, you start to have these shades of gray stories, which is kind of what we're mulling around in right now. And the what we're missing there is the contrast that's built by having polar opposites or extremes of something, right? And they're not, they can still have all the same things, the motivations, the desires, all they don't have to just be empty villains, right? Which Melkor is not an empty villain. He
No.
has a history, he feels these things, he's done all of these things. Like you have a backstory, but what you have is you have this overwhelming power of darkness and evil, basically. And then you have an underwhelming, like an overwhelmed group striving against it. And that, and they're very opposites, right? There's the children of Iluvatar and Melkor, right? And they are in direct conflict. But that direct conflict, this is like the stage in which these individual stories get to play out. And that stage of the polar opposites, or the contrasting good and evil as the stage, allows you to take concepts further than you would in a grayscale of anti-heroes and normal characters who are both good and bad. So you do get to have characters, I can't ever pronounce their names, Bren and
Baron, yeah.
Baron.
Beren.
Like in that story, it is, if he wasn't in a position in which he was completely overwhelmed by darkness, but then strove anyway because of what he loved, and then her love for him wouldn't let her sit by. And so now you have these two people on a quest that is basically unattainable. It's a suicide quest
Yep.
in which they do it together and overcome, and you have the most beautiful love story almost like that you can imagine, but it is framed in darkness and difficulty. And without that stage of good versus evil, like you don't get a love story like that.
No, and I think that's really, you know, honestly, I was just sitting here, just honestly kind of vibing on what you were saying because I was really loving that, man. Because I don't know that I had ever really thought of it that way. The idea that the conflict, rather than seeing that conflict of good and evil as like the conflict of the story, it's actually the setting of the story. And you're right, though. in the same way that it's when you are in a pitch black environment and then you're fumbling around and you find your flashlight and turn it on and then you are instantly blinded by
Mm,
what objectively is not that powerful a light. But because of the setting that you're using it in, it's overwhelming and it's brilliant and
hmm
blinding.
hmm
And I think that's what the contrast really allows for. You know, I mean, even so, towards the beginning, when Melkor slash Morgoth is basically just the punk stepchild,
Yep.
and Tulkas and all the others are just kind of like wailing on him when they need to. His villainy is made clearer because everything is bright and everything is good. And then
Oh,
look at how screwed up things get because you've got what ultimately is a child's tantrum.
hmm
But then that tantrum goes so far and things get so dark that again, your heroes, their light comes through so incredibly beautifully
yeah.
and meaningfully.
Well, I never even considered the light of Valar and how the evil sticks out and how like the kinslaying and all of the things that happened are so terrible because of the light and perfection of Valar. So like now you have evil as highlighted or darkness, which is highlighted because of the brightness. And that's again, so you start in a bright setting and you move to a dark setting almost. So the
Mm-hmm.
contrast transitions in there. That's brilliant, man. Which is makes sense for Tolkien, but like we could keep going. We are going to keep going. We're going to do a
Yep.
few more episodes, so hopefully you all are in for this. So buckle up. But if I was gonna jump into a life lesson, I would just be like looking for like I don't know about like the grim fairy tales because I don't some of those are just like I don't know if there's a lot of good to find in those, but like what I would say is don't shy away from tragedy, because in tragedy is where we're best able to see valor, and we saw that with like 9/11. Like when we went to the nine
Mm-hmm.
eleven memorial and we could hear the clips of the firefighters, like we saw the most valor in the worst time in our history or my history, right?
Yeah.
And so I think we try to shield our kids and shield ourselves from tragedy in every way, shape, or form. And I think we are missing out on valor. And I think valor is more meaningful and adds more value than a sanitized sugar rush, happy Disney version of life.
I agree, man. And I think my life lesson kind of pairing off of that is the idea of that kind of persistence almost without reference to the goal. And what I mean by that is this idea of, again, when we were talking about those two different types of hope, ultimately, what I hope for, I don't know. I know very vaguely that what I want is goodness, that what I want is God's will, God's kingdom here on earth.
Mm,
I don't know ultimately what that's going to look like.
yeah,
And I don't know. I have, in
that's
fact,
right.
I would, if I was going to say anything, I would say I'm way more confident that I will not see it than I am that I ever would.
Yeah,
Like,
yeah,
I'm not going to say definitively because who knows. But like, chances are there is a much greater chance that if we were to put it on kind of the Tolkien timeline, I am much more likely to be in like the second age or the early third age than I am to be at like the return of the king and peace is restored and those kinds of things. Like that's most likely where we're at.
mm-hmm, mm-hmm,
And that doesn't mean that my efforts are worthless or meaningless. If
right.
anything, it means they're all the more essential because I don't know how many of the future steps towards that kingdom are dependent on me having done my job now.
Mm,
And so, regardless of worrying about my small scale goals and hopes, instead just continuing to persist and trust that ultimately the one who's in charge will see my efforts and will use my efforts in the ways that he knows best rather than
Yeah,
relying on my input for them.
I love that. That was very well said. That's good. And that is the truth of what we struggle with too. Because you're right.
Yeah.
When you say it, like I don't know what the kingdom of heaven on earth would look like at all, but we still have to strive for it, which
Yeah.
is difficult to do.
Oh,
And so it's well said, well said. Well, everybody, I again, like I said, we hope you're in for this ride on the Silmarillion because we're gonna keep nerding out on it because it's worth nerding out on. And I mean, for the fact that we have like an Inklings based title and we haven't nerded out on anything Tolkien like this yet, like it's been in the years coming, like it's been coming. So jump online, buy a couple of bags of nine rings because that's based on lore, right? The nine
yeah.
rings,
There we go.
nine,
There we go.
get some of that, brew a cup of delicious coffee, listen to the conversation, read the Silmarillion, let us know your thoughts. I'm sure we'll be writing on it as well. So, would love to hear from you. You got anything else on your mind, man?
Nah, man, I'm good.
Very cool. With that, everybody will say
Adieu.